I'm Indy Neidell, and this is Out of the Foxholes, where I sit here in my chair of infinite knowledge and answer all your questions about World War II. Remember that if you desperately want me to deal with your question, then Time Ghost Army members get double secret probation level priority. The first question is such a Time Ghost Army question. Antoine B. asks, I do have one question for the next Foxholes. What happened to all the French, Belgian, and British POWs from the 1940 campaign? Well, there are a whole lot of Allied troops still on the European mainland following the Battle of France who become Axis POWs. The vast majority of them, roughly 1.8 million, are subjects of France and its colonial empire, while Belgium and the British lose approximately 200,000 soldiers to imprisonment each. Most of these POWs won't see freedom for years, but there is one pretty glaring exception to this. After the surrender of Belgium in May 1940, Hitler gives explicit orders that Flemish POWs are to be released where possible. This decision is part of the Flammenpolitik, where the Flemish are deemed by the Nazis to be of Germanic stock and can therefore maybe be annexed into a greater German Reich. And looking at the numbers, the fact that nearly 80,000 Flemish prisoners are repatriated by the end of May 1941 shows, well, Hitler means business. Non-Flemish POWs are not as lucky, and only a couple thousand will be repatriated before 1942. But most are at least treated according to the Geneva Conventions. Many will be transferred to camps in Germany in the months following the fall of France, separated by rank. Officers are imprisoned in Oflags, officers' camps, while NCOs and other ranks are imprisoned in Stalags, the main camps. These camps aren't your stereotypical barbed wire enclosed camps either. POWs are, well, these POWs are quite often given an unusually high degree of freedom, even working unguarded in factories or on farms. They're allowed to play sports and music in their leisure times, sometimes even mixing with local German civilians. In one camp, Stalag 9A, French prisoners form symphony and jazz orchestras. The extent of that kind of freedom largely rests on the camp's commandant, though, and some are much more restrictive and even brutal. I realize that when many of you, especially of my age and older, hear Stalag, you think of Colonel Klink, Sergeant Schultz, and Stalag 13. But that was just 60s television. Okay, the permissive treatment that I talked about never applies to colonial troops, though. Upon capture, thousands are summarily executed by German soldiers. One instance of this is the Chasselet massacre in June 1940, where roughly 50 Senegalese troops are gunned down despite having laid down their arms, and their white compatriots are not. On top of this, 120,000 colonials are put in camps, and these camps are not at all like the ones Allied European soldiers are put in, with colonial soldiers being confined to Frontstalags, German POW camps in France. This is under the guise of avoiding the spread of tropical disease, but the Nazis also want to prevent any chance of colonials mixing with German women. Okay, this is from a viewer who would like to stay anonymous. Okay. Hi, Andy. I have a question about the Jewish leadership in the Luftwaffe, how they were viewed and treated. I am referring to Erhard Milch and Helmut Wilberg. Please explain how the men who wrote Luftwaffe doctrine, Wilberg, and the head of Jagerstab, Milch, were both Jewish and how they were accepted and allowed. Well, it does bear mentioning that Jewish is pretty open-ended here. Before the war, most German Jews would have seen that in purely religious terms, with any other identity being no different from German Catholics or German Protestants. Others might see their Jewishness as an ethnic or even a national identity. But to the Nazis, Jewishness is a racial identity based on blood and codified in the Nuremberg race laws of 1935. And according to those laws, two high-ranking officers in the Luftwaffe, Erhard Milch and Helmut Wilberg, classify as Mischling, or mixed race, in the first degree. Milch has a Jewish father, Wilberg a Jewish mother. This means they're still technically eligible for Reich citizenship under the Nuremberg laws, provided they don't identify as Jewish religiously, but would usually be be treated as second-class citizens. Mischlinge are also banned from serving in the army as of 1940. Now, these two people's early careers are actually quite similar. Both joined the German military before the First World War. Milch had resigned from the military at the beginning of the 1920s to work in civil aviation. In 1929, he joined the Nazi Party, and in 1933 returned to the military, joining the Reich Ministry of Aviation under Hermann Goering. Shortly after this, reports of Milch's Jewish father lead to a Gestapo investigation. However, Goering viewed Milch as too valuable to the new Luftwaffe and stopped the investigation. He was able to get an affidavit from Milch's mother affirming that her uncle was Milch's real father. Being the product of incest is to them less shameful than having a Jewish father, apparently. This allows Milch to receive a German blood certificate, despite further rumors that his mother was Jewish as well. Milch is now a Generalfeldmarschall and in charge of aircraft production in the Luftwaffe. As for Wilberg, he never left the military, and he moved around as an officer in different branches until Goering decided he wanted him as chief of staff of the new Luftwaffe. However, Wilberg's Jewish ancestry comes out, keeping him from that position. Goering, not wanting to lose Wilberg, gets Hitler to legally reclassify Wilberg as Aryan to keep him in the Luftwaffe. Wilberg is dismissed from the Luftwaffe in 1938 for reasons that are unclear, but he's reinstated shortly before the invasion of Poland, becoming General de Flieger before he dies last November, something I mentioned in the weekly coverage of the war. It's not clear how Milch and Wilberg rationalized being Jewish and serving Nazi Germany. They are not the only Jews in the Luftwaffe, and there are varying explanations given by varying people. Some view serving in the military as a way of hiding in plain sight. Others maintain a certain level of allegiance to Germany and feel a duty to serve their country. Several do not view themselves as Jews, or if they do, don't think the anti-Semitism is directed at them. Let's see. I can't tell you who asked this next question because whoever wrote it down didn't write the poster's name alongside it. Well, here at Time Ghost, we're nothing if not professional. But it's a great question nevertheless, okay? And I'm sure somebody's going to tell me who wrote it. Did the French colonial islands off the coast of Canada, Saint-Pierre and Miquelon, in the Gulf of St. Lawrence, support the Vichy French? And if so, how were these islands affected during the war, since they lie close to a major shipping lane for war supplies? In July 1940, the little archipelago's executive administrator, Gilbert de Bournat, recognizes the legitimacy of the Vichy French government. These islands are situated almost in sight of Canada's and Newfoundland's shores. Newfoundland is currently a dominion in the British Commonwealth. And, as the mystery person who posed this question pointed out, right next to a major shipping lane. Militarily, they pose no threat whatsoever, though. First of all, the islands have been demilitarized since 1763. The Treaty of Paris that year, that ended the 7 Years' War, effectively extinguished the French colonial presence in the area. France was allowed to keep Saint-Pierre and Miquelon, but pledged to have no garrisons, no fortifications there. And second, Marshal Pétain promises the Canadian and American governments that Germany and Italy will not be granted permission to use French territories in the Western Hemisphere. And despite Pétain becoming a puppet of the Axis, the governments of Canada and the US maintain diplomatic relations with Vichy and are hesitant to take any aggressive actions. Canada especially has been scared of a fierce reaction from its French-speaking population should anything go awry with Vichy, creating a potential conscription crisis and faltering support for the war effort. This does shift somewhat in 1941, as Vichy France continues to make large concessions to the Axis in Africa. Plus, the radio station on the islands that broadcasts pro-Vichy propaganda is also being used to relay coded broadcasts containing meteorological reports to U-boats and information on Allied convoys crossing the Atlantic. Neither the US nor Canada, nor Newfoundland, seem like they want to do much about it. But Charles de Gaulle does. On December 12, 1941, he orders the seizure of the islands, and on the night of December 24th, over 350 Free French sailors on 3 corvettes and a submarine, land and take over things in 30 minutes without firing a shot. The seizure of the islands becomes a significant political affair, as it looks a lot to a bunch of people like it was done with the support of American and Canadian forces. De Gaulle is supposedly surprised by this, and he will recall after the war, "One might have thought that this small operation, carried out so happily, would have been ratified by the American government without any shock. But no, it was a real storm that broke out in the United States. Mr. Cordell Hull himself began it with a communique that he was interrupting his Christmas holidays and returning in haste to Washington." Churchill arrives in the U.S. 2 days before the landing, and he also recalls Hull's rage. "I was struck by the fact that amid gigantic events, one small incident seemed to dominate his mind. Plans are drawn up for the withdrawal of the Free French forces, and the possibility of introducing a joint American and Canadian occupation force is explored. But in the end, nothing really happens." By February 1942, the incident has dropped off the radar as attention turns to the continuous escalation of the war. So that ends Out of the Foxholes for today. If you'd like to know about the state of the Luftwaffe at the beginning of Operation Barbarossa, check out the special I did on just that right here. There'll be a link anytime soon. And if you have a question you'd like answered, then you can ask it at community.timegos.tv. Not here. If you'd like your question to be prioritized like Antoine Bies was, that's a good last name, Bies was, like Antoine Bies' question was, right? Then you can join the Time Ghost Army at patreon.com or timeghost.tv. And do not forget to subscribe, and I'll see you next time.